Welcome to the Overture Edge, a discussion with today's top business leaders about the motivations and strategies contributing to their current success. It's powered by the Overture Group, a premier executive search and compensation consulting firm dedicated to helping mid-market companies. Your host is John Liacani, the founder and managing director of the Overture Group. He has over 30 years of executive search experience and is also the founder and executive director of the Leadership Group, an executive career management and networking association in the Chicagoland area with over 475 members. Now, here's your host, John Liacani.
Hello and welcome. I'm John Liacani. I'm your host and co-founder and managing partner here at the Overture Group. Welcome to another edition of the Overture Edge. Today, our topic is going to be long-term incentive plans, which is a very hot topic when it comes to executive compensation in mid-market companies. And I am very honored to have Bob Lindeman today as my guest. He's not only my guest, he's been my business partner for the last 15 years. But I think, Bob, our relationship goes back longer than that. I think it's about 25 years when you hired me at RSM. So it's great to have you here. And I know I've introduced you more than once, from presentations that you've given before. So this is great to be able to do this again and have you here. As like I said, Bob is a co-founder in the Overture Group. But prior to starting the Overture Group with myself and my partner Brandy out in Iowa, Bob spent 25 years as a partner at RSM, which is a national consulting and accounting firm where he's performed various consulting assignments in industries such as manufacturing, wholesale distribution, association of professional services. Also, during that time at RSM, Bob has served in various leadership roles around RSM. Also, as I said, he heads up our compensation consulting division here at the Overture Group, but also during Bob's time, you've been on over 8 boards and you've chaired 3 compensation consulting or compensation committees for those boards, which is great. So welcome to the pod. How are you?
Great.
This is your first pod, right?
First pod.
I know.
I'm a little nervous,
Well, you should be, because I told you we're only doing one take on this, okay, and that's it. So it's great. But this is a very important topic, and I know we've hit on it many times before. But I don't think there's a week that goes by that we don't have a conversation, you and I, and or with our clients, about the importance of long-term incentive plans. It's a very engaging topic. So today, what I'd love the audience to walk away with is a better understanding of what is an LTIP, right? What is it? Why have they become such a hot topic? And what are the reasons companies should consider having an LTIP and why they haven't in the past, right? So we want to talk about that. We also want to talk about what's changed in the last 15 to 20 years affecting LTIPs, and briefly discuss different types of long-term incentive plans for privately held companies, and then discuss some key design considerations. And that's what I would love the audience to walk away with today. So let's get right into it. So first question for you, Bob. What's an LTIP?
Well, it's, the first time I heard the term about 30 years ago, and I didn't even know what it meant. But long-term, an LTIP is simply a long-term incentive plan. And I like to define it as a plan that's performance-based, number one. And number two, it pays out some point in the future. And usually that performance period is at least 3 years, if not longer. And that differentiates itself from a non-qualified deferred comp plan that's not performance-based. And there are quite a few out there that are not performance-based. But our focus today is on performance-based long-term incentive plans that have longer performance periods that are paid out in the future.
Yeah. So why do executives, well, let's do this. Why do executives want LTIPs, and then why do companies want them?
Well, executives want them because if you think about a compensation package, there's your base salary, your annual incentive, and your long-term incentive. And of course, you have your employee benefits. Well, you're limited on your 401k plan in terms of what you could sock away. Mm-hmm. And what they like about them is a long-term incentive plan is truly a wealth building mechanism, because it's usually span over a series of years. And typically executives are getting these in their last maybe 8, 10, 15, 20 years. So it really allows them to build wealth. But the other reason is they want to make sure they have a competitive compensation package.
Yeah.
And in today's environment, there's a lot more information out there in publications and surveys and magazines and just in public. And if you're in an industry or in a company of a certain size and don't have a long-term incentive plan, you feel like you're a little shorted. So they want them for competitive reasons.
So what's the prevalence of these plans with companies? Does it vary maybe by size or industry?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. If you go back, say 30 years ago, and you took, say, companies under 500 million, okay, just to use a round number, probably only 20-25% of those companies offered them. And companies under 100 million, it may have been only 10%.
Yeah. Okay.
And nowadays, and there's not super, super good statistics on this because, but we've seen enough, and there are some surveys out there, but they're not as accurate because as publicly held company data, because that's a required disclosure. Privately held companies are not required to disclose to the public that they have long-term incentive plans. But anyway, I would say about 80% of companies over 200 million have long-term incentive plans, and probably 50%. The real question is who's eligible, and I know we're going to get to that in a minute. Now, that can vary by industry. You get to a biotech or a technology or an IT company or a software company, they're, especially since they're usually startups or they're rapidly growing, that industry by its very nature offers stock options or stock appreciation rights or some form of equity or long-term incentive plan because they have to attract a lot of people. The risk is a little higher, even though people don't realize that the risk is a little higher. So for that risk, you get that reward. But that industry, they'll do stock options top to bottom.
So what's changed the last, say, 20 years?
Well, the biggest thing that's changed, and not much has changed on the technology side because they've been doing it for 30, 40 years. You look at Microsoft and companies like that. What's changed is there's always been private equity around, but since the turn of the century, private equity has just taken off. Yeah. There are some statistics out there, and private equity are gobbling up and they're acquiring small to mid-sized businesses now. And when they acquire small to mid-sized businesses, they offer long-term incentive plans, typically profits, interests, or other types of plans. And so if you're competing with a private equity firm and you didn't have a long-term incentive plan, you're not competitive. So I think it's put a lot of pressure on privately held companies that have not had long-term incentive plans. So I think that's one thing that's changed. And there's one statistic out there that says 20 to 25% of all privately held companies now are private equity owned. So they've become a real force. Yeah. So to compare that, our clients, they're typical middle market companies, did not have to worry about the large companies because a lot of people just don't want to work for the large companies. And if they did, they'd be working for them. So they didn't worry about, the General Motors and the large companies that were offering long-term incentive plans. So the other reason is demographics. If you look, and I'm a baby boomer, and a lot of the baby boomers have been retiring in the last 5-8 years, and we probably have another 5 or so years where they're going to continue. That puts a lot of pressure on management teams because you got that brain drain. So to make sure that they don't lose any more executives, they're hanging on to those people that are between 50 and 65 by giving them long-term incentives. So they got to go out to the marketplace to attract them and to retain them.
I will tell you, in the recruiting world, when a privately held company has an LTIP, it increases the candidate pool. And I will tell you, when they don't, boy, it's tough nowadays to find an executive to make a move if they're going to a company with no longer-term incentive plan. Very, very tough. But all right, let's talk about now kind of plan design considerations. What's a starting point and what are the key considerations in selecting a plan?
Okay. There's several key considerations, and one is the life cycle of the business you're in, and when I say life cycle, are you in growth mode or you're in mature mode? Also, what's the long-term vision of the company? I say 5, 10, 15 years out. So if you're a company that's very profitable but not really growing, a stock appreciation right or a plan that's going to appreciate in value is probably not the right kind of plan for you. Maybe it's a phantom stock plan that gives you appreciation but it gives you an underlying value of the stock, or maybe a long-term profit sharing plan or a performance unit plan, which we're going to talk about later. So you have to look at the life cycle. Also, from a vision point of view, if we hear that the client's probably going to sell in the next 8 or 10 years, an equity-based or an equity look-like plan or a synthetic equity plan, again, which is a stock appreciation right, or a phantom stock plan works better because typically when a company sells, there's a lot of upside potential. Conversely, and we're going to talk about some other plans that are popular, but you also have to look at your demographics too when you're looking at design considerations. If you have a lot of people in their 50s and 40s, you're going to have to come up with a different plan because you have to look at the demographics. They may not want to stick around until they're 65, so they're going to want a plan that has more frequent payouts. They don't want to wait till 65 to get some payouts. That doesn't mean they're going to get paid out every year, but we're going to have more frequent payouts. So that's another design consideration. So those are just a couple.
Are there any particular types of plans that are more popular than others?
Well, the 5 plans that are the most common that you see in the marketplace, and we already talked about phantom stock and stock appreciation rights. We hear about those all the time. But also you have a long-term profit sharing plan, and there's 2 types. And I'm not talking about the profit sharing plan that some people have in their qualified retirement plans. We're talking about long-term profit sharings where a certain percentage of the profits are going to the executives either into a pool and allocated or some kind of formula basis. But there's the flat percentage kind, and then there's the tiered kind. The tiered kind is where they, as they go up in profitability, they're more likely to increase that percentage to make sure that the allocations are bigger and the executives are promoting higher profitability. The other plan that we see too is profits interest with LLCs. Private equity likes profits interest. They work very similar to stock options, but they're a little bit more complicated because the design features of a profits interest are a little bit different. And the reason private equity likes them, at least for now, they qualify for capital gains. Most of your long-term incentive plans do not qualify for long-term capital gains. They're ordinary income deductions, which benefit the owners, but the participants have to pay ordinary income tax.
Yes. Yeah. So
those are the 5 most popular plans. Oh, we didn't cover the performance unit plan. The performance unit plan is an elongated annual incentive plan. Annual incentive plan typically has 1, 2, 3, or 4 metrics that are typically quantifiable. A performance unit plan, which is frequently called a PUP, and that's the actual term that they use in the compensation rewards industry. It's usually tied to 1 or 2 or 3 performance measures, but the key is it's over a 3 or a 4 year period. You look at your cumulative results over the 3 or 4 year period, and that determines how much you've earned over that period. So what people like about that is dependent on and there's always a profitability measure. There could be a gross profit measure. There could be a revenue measure. Whatever you're going to measure, it's easy to figure out. They're simple plans to design. Well, they're never simple plans to design because you're forecasting out into the future what you're going to make. And to that end, it gets a little more complicated. But PUPs, I would say, between PUPs and stock appreciation rights, between those 2, it's a coin flip. And then with private equity, it's almost all LCs, at least for the top executives. When you get below the top executives, they might use some of these other long-term incentive plans.
So who typically participates in? A lot of people want to know what's the typical potential income.
Okay, so most plans, when they're designed, assuming we don't have a sale transaction at the end, but we bake that into some of our plans. But typically, and it's going to vary by executive. So a CEO in a smaller company might get, their target might be 40 or 50% of their base salary, and that might be maybe an $80 million to a $400 million manufacturing or company. And once you start getting to $1 billion, and most of our clients are $2 billion and under, but once you get up around $1 billion, it could be 100% of their base salary.
It's pretty significant.
The larger you go and you get into the public companies, their base salaries are much smaller in relation to their annual incentives and long-term incentives. But in our client base, I would say for the CEOs, it's typically 40 to 50% target, and then the max might be 50% more than that, maybe a 75%, maybe 80%. maybe up to 100%. Again, it depends on the size of the company. And then for the VPs, typically you're talking about maybe a target incentive of anywhere from 25 to 40%. It all depends on their compensation mix, because they might be more heavily skewed towards their annual incentive plan than a long-term incentive plan. That's why we have to look at their total compensation strategy and pay mix, but 25 to 40% of base salary. So when you think about that, when you get to larger companies, the dollars get bigger, because the base salaries are bigger.
Yeah. But it's also, I think, important to tie long-term incentive plans to the company's compensation philosophy.
Exactly. You have to. And when you there's two questions. There's a lot of questions you answer with a compensation policy. Where do we want to be in relation to market with respect to our base salary, annual incentive, and long-term incentive? Where do we want to be? 25th, 50th, 75th percentile. And that's typically tied to performance. And the other question is, what do we want our pay mix to be? And pay mix is really, when you look at a pie chart and you take that base salary, annual incentive, long-term incentive, what do we want that pay mix to be? We have some clients that are heavily skewed towards performance. They have a lower base salary and higher long-term incentives and higher annual incentives. And some clients are exactly the reverse.
All right. Give me, just before we move on to the next section, give me a couple mistakes that you see companies make when they're designing or implementing these plans. The oops.
Okay. Well, I want to finish the other part of that question because it's really important. One of the trends we see, John, typically the participants are the top CEO and the top management team.
Yeah.
Okay. We are seeing a trend towards
Going down.
And it doesn't happen immediately. Sometimes it does because of their culture and their philosophy. But typically what happens is they'll say, hey, we have some young up-and-comers. They're going to be future VPs, maybe a CEO. We cannot afford to lose them.
Yeah.
Now, they're not going to get the same potential that a VP or a CEO, so their target might be 10 or 15 or 20% at the max, but they're reaching down into the organization. And one point I want to make there is sometimes they don't make everybody at that level eligible. They might just pick and choose 2 or 3 that are, key people, fast trackers, people they can't afford to lose. So they'll make them sign confidentiality agreements as part of the long-term incentive plan, because you don't want to cause an internal equity issue when some people are participating and some people aren't. That's not a problem with publicly held companies, because it's usually a function of your compensation level and organizational level that determines your eligibility. That's not always true in a privately held company.
Yeah, and I've seen to that point, typically in privately held companies, it was either the VP or C-suite, and now I'm seeing companies going down to the director level, right, with this. So talk to me then about the oops, some of the mistakes you may see when they're, designing or implementing.
Well, it's actually how I got started, okay, because I used to be very good with modeling, okay, and I'm still okay, but not as good as I was, 20, 30 years ago, and now I can push that modeling down to other people, but I'm still pretty good at modeling. The number one mistake that people make is they select the wrong plan. They put a stock appreciation plan into a company that's not high growth, or a company's going to sell in 3 to 5 years, and they're putting in a plan that doesn't give the people the upside potential if the company's going to sell. So some people just don't put a lot of thought. All they do is copy their neighbor's plan and put it in there, and we see a lot of that. The next one is the plan is way too complex to understand. The third one is, and it gets back to a point that we're going to talk about in a second, nobody ever modeled the plan, or at least did a really thorough job of modeling at least 7, ideally 10 years out. And I know it's hard to model. That's why we recommend to our clients, or when we're doing the models, to do 3 scenarios: an optimistic, a realistic, and a pessimistic. That way you develop a relevant range. But the reason you do that is to be able to communicate the cost to ownership under different scenarios, and likewise, what's the benefit, the value to the participants. So,
right. Yep.
And what we see, John, the mistake they make is some plans are not very meaningful. The company's doing extremely well, and very little is going to the executives, or conversely, the plan is overly rich, and we got too much of the bottom line going to a long-term incentive plan.
So, all right, last subject I really want to hit on. Once you've selected and you've designed the plan, you need to implement it. What the heck do you do to implement it? Effectively. Effectively.
That ties to the fourth point about communications, that when you go to implement a plan, make sure you don't cut corners and you properly communicate the plan. What that means is typically, say there's 4 or 5 participants or 3 or 15, whatever. You want to get them in a room and do a PowerPoint. And when you do that, you go over the key features of the plan, the vesting, the mechanics, the objectives of the plan, the payout strategies. You want to go through all of that. And you might have a hypothetical, generic, projection going 10 years out so they fully understand the plan. The other thing that a lot of our clients do, and we're part of these sometimes, is after the 1 hour meeting where you go over the PowerPoint and you explain the plan and the particulars, you'll sit down with either the CEO and myself or somebody else, and we'll go over the participants' individual projections to show them, here's, do you have any other questions? Okay. Then communications doesn't end there. Typically there's, maybe a Q&A a week later, just to say, now that you've seen the legal documents, you saw the projections, you had the meeting, maybe you have another Q&A a week later. But communications don't end when you roll out the plan. Every year, you should have a participant statement, and ideally every other year, you want to reinforce the plan by updating your projections and showing the participants, here's what you got vested, and here's what you don't have vested. You already have that in your participant statement, but here's what we project the next 3 to 5 years or 10 years to do. So that reinforces the plan.
Yeah.
Especially sometimes there's some plan mechanics that changed or some features of the plan. So you want to reinforce the plan. So just submitting an annual participant statement in and of itself is good, but it's not good enough sometimes.
And you talk about, I've heard you talk about this story more than one time about, I think a plan wasn't fully communicated to an employee and he was ready to leave the company and he didn't understand what he was walking away from.
Oh,
you
yeah.
want to tell that story?
And I love to tell. I did not design the plan. It was in the mid-'90s when I first got it started. And it was one of our audit clients at RSM. And he calls me up and he wanted us to do a search. And I said, why are we? He goes, I'm losing my VP of manufacturing. I said, why is he leaving? Well, he's going to make 25. I can't remember the exact dollar amount. Is either $25,000 or $50,000. And back then, that's like $50,000 to $100,000.
Sure.
That he was going to walk away from. And that's what he had unvested, let alone what he already had vested, let alone the company was beginning to really take off. So he was walking away from unvested dollars. His vested dollars were going to probably get discounted a little because he was leaving maybe 10 or 15 years early. And then he was walking away from future growth. So I go to Jim. I said, Jim, you realize he's walking away from, $50,000, maybe $100,000? He goes, what are you talking about? I said, Jim, you got this performance-based deferred comp plan that I didn't put it in. I wish I did, but I said, it's been out there for 10 years. And he goes, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I'll go get our audit work papers. And so we sat down with the executive. The executive went, and he had 2 children in college, so he had a little financial pressure on him. He took the projections home. He showed his wife his vested on.
That was it.
He goes, I don't want to say exactly the words she said.
You can.
Said,
well,
you ain't leaving. You ain't leaving this company. And so within a week, he was happy, and Jim learned a very valuable learning experience there about the importance. And one of the reasons he didn't communicate it is he had 2 participants in the plan. One of them left a few years earlier to move back home and really didn't accumulate much. And he only had 1 person left in the plan. So he rolled out the plan with just 2 participants because he was a smaller company. By the way, eventually they grew, they quadrupled in size, and he had 7 people in his plan. And we implemented a new plan. And you could be assured that we were communicating that plan at least annually. So lesson learned there.
No, and communication is a key. So I think this is a good place to kind of wrap the pod up here. And before we do, I've got 4 concluding comments about LTIPs. Okay. One is long-term incentive compensation plans are a vital tool in creating a company's long-term success. They can help companies attract, retain, and engage a talent that's required to drive the company's long-range vision. These plans, however, should be carefully selected, designed, and implemented with the appropriate communications to ensure they achieve the desired results. And lastly, a well thought out plan can have a profoundly positive long-term impact, while a poorly designed plan can result in extremely negative outcome, which is very, very important. Any final thoughts on LTIPs today before we wrap up?
Yeah, one comment that I'd like to make is and I read this in a wealth management magazine, that there's more millionaires created from long-term incentive plans than any other form, like inheritance. You always think, oh, they're a millionaire. They're worth $2, $3, $4, $5, $20 million because of inheritance. No, it's long-term incentive plans in the last 20 years. I read that. And it's mainly coming from public companies that have really lucrative plans. But in the last 20 years, we've seen more and more. And the beauty of a long-term incentive plan, it truly is a wealth-building tool. If you think about a participant that's going to earn $50,000 or $75,000 a year, or maybe more, in a long-term incentive plan, you take that over 10 or 15 years, that's meaningful dollars. And typically, that's accruing value in the company, and maybe it's getting a return and or periodically got, cash out of it, and they probably don't need that money to live off of, so they're investing it. So great wealth building tool. We love doing those plans or assisting our plans or critiquing the plans because it's a very positive event for the company. And just one other thing I say, that John, these, if they're designed right, they don't cost the company money. And think about a pie chart.
Yeah.
If that pie's getting bigger, okay, from a profitability point of view or a value point of view, and you're carving out a slice, maybe it's 7% or 8% of that pie. If the pie is getting bigger, the profit pie or the valuation pie, the owners are winning and the participants are winning. So it should be accretive. So it should be driving shareholder value. It should be driving increased profitability. And to that end, that's why it's an incentive plan. It's performance-based.
Yeah, that's a great way to wrap it up. And I know it's an education process because there's a lot of owners out there, when they initially embark on the journey, they don't understand. You have to do a lot of education. So if any of you out there have any questions, feel free to contact me or contact Bob, or follow us up on our socials. And Bob, thanks for coming out, because this topic is hot in executive compensation and privately held companies. So thanks for sharing your experience and your expertise with us. And we look forward to you, the audience, again, joining our next episode of the Overture Edge. So with that, I want everybody to have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for being a part of the Overture Edge, powered by the Overture Group. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow our LinkedIn page, and visit us at theoverturegroup.com to stay up to date on the latest executive recruiting and compensation trends. If you have any questions or would like to contact us, please email John at jliacone@theoverturegroup.com. That's JLIACONE@theoverturegroup.com. Thank you again for listening.